Good morning. Thank you for joining us. We are having fun around here this morning. Thank you, Nick, Martha, and Scott for that intro. We have Lauren Shealy with you this morning. And we really are, we've had to sort of reinvent how we do this. And we've kind of gotten into a groove and are having some fun with it. I think it's the closest I'll ever come to being a movie star, so I'm going with it. I've always wanted a talk show. So thank you for joining us this morning. We're glad that you have tuned in. And I invite you to join us as we say our creed every morning, every time that we gather here together. We open with this creed. So I invite you to claim that and affirm that with us this morning. Our God is love. Our race is human. Our faith is oneness. My reading this morning comes to you from The Eye of the Storm. By Reverend Gary Simmons. We've taught this class here before. I love this book and this work, and I think it fits nicely to a lot of what we are experiencing in our world today and what we are called to do. So I share that with you this morning with that in mind. Transforming the challenges in our lives requires of us the ability to become present to life with greater courage and strength. The movement toward becoming one global community has brought humanity to the edge of its resourcefulness. An interplanetary visitor might find our world an enigma. How is it possible that so many in the human family are suffering while there is comfort enough to soothe the afflicted? How is it possible that there is so little food and safe drinking water for nearly 2/3 of the world when the earth shares so freely of its abundance? How is it possible that our inhumanity to each other is tolerated and frequently defended? The growing disparity between the haves and the have-nots is creating global tension. Tension begets defensiveness. Defensiveness begets divisiveness. Yet the growing polarization within society is symptomatic. It is evidence of humanity undergoing transition and rebirth. Conflicts and adversity are our midwives. Our painful labor becomes ever more excruciating as we struggle to reconcile our human frailties and character defects with our innate wholeness. This reconciliation, the integration of our spirituality with our human condition, is the remedy for a troubled world. If it is materially possible to ease suffering, feed the hungry, shelter the afflicted, and protect the vulnerable, but we are not doing it, it may be because we have yet to think of ourselves as whole beings. We have yet to discover the tremendous power of the presence of God at our center, at the core of every life experience. It is this integration of spirit and humanity that constitutes infinite and eternal life. In the face of adversity, where humanity meets the impossible, Spirit beckons us to come alive, to show up, to become present.
God is in this place. I can feel the mighty power and the grace. There's a holy hush around us. I see glory on each face. Surely the presence of love is in this place.
So I invite us to take a breath, to allow ourselves to become present in this now moment, whatever may be going on around you. Allow yourself to be right here, right now, as you connect to that love, to that life force known as God, as Spirit, as divine mind that is running in and through your very being. We connect with that presence, that power of love at our very center, always available to us, really always beckoning us to be present with it. And so as we connect with that truth, the truth that lives through each one of us as love, as the expression of the divine right here, right now, we rest in that awareness and we trust that our life is fulfilling a greater purpose and that we are all, each one, connected through our divine inheritance and our divine purpose. We experience that individually and collectively. And so we consciously and purposefully connect with that awareness. We connect and we call forward that sense of innate wholeness that resides within each one of us. And breathing into that awareness, centering more fully into that space, we bring to mind anyone in our lives, on our hearts, who may be experiencing discomfort, disease, challenges of any kind. We bring them into our sphere of awareness, seeing each one of them connected to this truth, to this inherent wholeness, to that center within them where divine love resides. And may they feel uplifted and strengthened and guided by that presence and that awareness. And we hold ourselves in that place and that space as we navigate these times in our world that are challenging for us all on many levels. We stay connected to the truth of our being, to the truth of divine love, of spirit, of source, of God, that seeks to express all the more fully through each one of us. And for our opportunity to know this connection and to live into it and to call upon it, we are grateful. And so it is. Amen. Thank you so much, Lauren. That was beautiful. I've never heard that song by Olivia Newton-John. It's beautiful. So I wanted to start off my talk with you today by retelling a story. Hopefully I will do it justice. It's short and sweet. I heard it via Tara Brock, who I've been listening to her podcasts. I highly recommend it if you have any interest in going deeper with the conversations that are occurring, and certainly from the lens of mindfulness and compassion. She does an outstanding job of presenting those topics in a very compelling way. So she shares a story of a man that she came to know through she's a practicing Buddhist, and he is a practicing Buddhist, has taken his vows of compassion, and he is an inmate in San Quentin prison. He's actually serving on death row and has been for several years. And in one of their conversations, he shared a story of how I get the sense that he is living his commitment to mindfulness in Buddhism and compassion right where he is, which is surely in a difficult place. But he tells a story of being out in the prison yard one day, and a newer, larger, young inmate he was standing near picked up a rock and was getting ready to throw it at a seagull that was right across the yard in a puddle of water. And just sort of instantaneously, this man, his name is Jarvis Masters, put his hand up and blocked the rock. And the whole yard went silent, because there's a real clear culture of minding your own darn business or trouble will ensue. And so the young inmate said, "What are you doing, man?" And he said, before I could even think about it, I just blurted out, "That bird's got my wings." And the kid sort of was, not sure what he meant, but he dropped the rock, and everyone sort of leaned in, and he didn't say anything else. But no more trouble ensued. But for days after that, the inmates were questioning him. "What did you mean by that? That bird's got my wings?" It really captivated them. And he went on to discuss that more fully with them. But Tara concluded that the meaning, of course, is a representation. It represents a truth that we all have the same longing for love, the same longing for freedom, the same longing for wings that fly. And in a timeless way, we all arise from expressions of the same formless presence. There is one underlying awareness, spirit, living through us. What would the world be like if we moved through the world connected to this deep awareness? That bird's got my wings. This is an expression of an evolved and awakened heart, and it arises in us all when we pay attention. I loved that story, and it reminded me what has come to me in several ways as I've thought about talking to you this week. And that is our principle, our teaching of oneness. And I've said this before, and I said it to the Facebook Live crew that was here, that I was with just a few minutes ago, but I'm going to say it again because I think it's worth really understanding the principle behind that teaching, which that story so eloquently reminds us of. And when I was learning about unity and taking classes at Unity Village, and I was in an advanced metaphysics class, I can't remember what my assignment was. It was divine paradox I had to do a presentation on. And I was really struggling with one aspect of it, and I don't remember the actual paradox, but what I got to was I had to really try to explain through principle what that meaning is, what when we say we believe in the principle of oneness, what does that really mean? As my metaphysics teacher said, it's not just singing Kumbaya together and feeling good. It's more than a feeling when you consider it as a principle. And so we have to begin with our first principle, which I know you all know, that there is one power and one presence in the universe and in our life. And that power is known as God, divine mind, divine spirit, source, however you know it, is good. So that there's no opposing force that is at odds with God, the good. Any experience of evil or badness is really a human creation and experience. And then the second teaching is where the oneness comes in, that each one of us is an expression of that one. Actually, all of creation is an expression of that one source, which ultimately we can think of as energy, right? Or you can think of however when you think of God in the fullness of divine mind, divine love, all that conjures up. To understand that each one of us as representations of humanity have at our core that same energy, that same fullness, that same capacity. That is our essence, our truth that we would call with a capital T. So if we believe that no one can be left out of that. It's either true or it's not. And so when you really envision that there is that one power, that one presence, that one energetic creative source that is imbued in all of creation, you and me and Martha, at its very essence, it's all the same. Now, how we express that as individuals and how that gets directed by our culture, by our, the time in which we grow up, all of that, the family in which we're born into, of course, expresses differently. But the truth is, and this is where people say, well, wait a minute, what about those people? What about the people? Oh, that's a great example, that guy on death row. I actually do not know what his crime was. But people that commit horrific crimes, people, we struggle there because we're not seeing any outward expression of goodness, so to speak. But I strongly believe, and if you think about it, if we want to know that this is the truth, that yes, even those people, and in fact, perhaps more than any of us, have been disconnected from the ways, who knows, their life experience has gone from that core truth. I know that many of us, I know that myself, being a truth student and an associate minister at this point, I still struggle with embracing the fullness of that truth for myself. And I haven't had a particularly challenging life experience. So we can see, I hope, that given what life brings upon us, that awareness is either nurtured or it's sort of covered up pretty quickly by survival. So the other thing about that, and I'm skipping around a little bit, but that's what I do, that I was really reminded of is, from The Eye of the Storm, which I read already from this morning, and I don't need to pick the book up, but the whole premise of The Eye of the Storm is how to really show up in times of conflict, personal conflict with our coworker, with our spouse, and certainly in bigger situations of community conflict, perhaps. But really looking at inner conflict and relational experiences that we have, is that how we handle that and how we either show up from a place of judgment or defensiveness or righteousness, or maybe just as the victim, versus as the presence of, as a presence really of love and understanding and connection, doesn't mean that we're not going to allow, we're going to tolerate being abused or misused or misspoken to. No, but when we come from a place where we are connected with that innate wholeness, that innate truth of us, the place from which we start is already different. We're not coming from a place of defensiveness. Nobody needs to be wrong. We can really be present to the other person and to the experience from a place of really valuing our wholeness and our connection in that. So the other piece of this that I want to stress is that the work that is presented in the eye of the storm is all about figuring out where we have disconnected from our wholeness and reclaiming that. It's not about figuring out how to, which of course you would probably guess, but it's not about blaming or shaming anybody else or ourselves, but really getting in touch with the places in ourselves where we have disconnected from our wholeness. And when we do that, that's where we are much more easily triggered by what's happening around us, as though it's happening to us, yes? And so we can get defensive, we can get anxious, we can get fearful. And not to say that we don't have those experiences even when we are fully connected, but we bring the fullness of that connection to every experience. And so that need, as the reading talked about, to integrate our spiritual awareness, our spiritual connection with our humanity is so crucial. I mean, we talk about it here, we experience it here, and even I sometimes still sort of have it separate. I'm connected with my spiritual self when I'm meditating, when I'm reading these sorts of things, when I'm contemplating these sorts of things, really getting it, really feeling the fullness of it, and then I pull out from here in traffic and someone cuts me off, and there we go. I mean, that's just a little example, right? How can I begin to really connect with these truths in all aspects of all of my life? And I think that's really what, on some level, we're being asked to consider. And so one of my favorite quotes from the book is sort of a call to action, if you will. It goes like this: I am called to be a peacemaker as a pathway to God and as a demonstration of my wholeness and worth. I am willing to make my pathway to God be a demonstration of this truth. For blessed are we who have been called to make peace in a world that longs to know its wholeness and worth. Blessed are we who have been called to make peace in the world. How do we know that's us? Because we're here right now, and because that is definitely what is being called of all of us in our world on many levels. And what I love about this is that the world collectively, back to the big understanding of the source of all that is, because that is what it is, it's expressing through all of a creation, all of the world, longs to know that wholeness through each one of us knowing it for ourselves. So as we do it, I mean, it's just so, it brings such possibility and such purpose to doing what we're doing for ourselves, connecting with ourselves, noticing the places where we are not connected with our truth, with our wholeness, or where we act as though we are not. And as we do that and uncover the places where the truth is we're never separate from our wholeness, right? But we perceive that we are. I envision it like, we're sort of born completely intact, completely, you see this in little kids sometimes. I wish I could remember. They have this memory, they have this expression of sort of a deep connection. And then, depending on who you're born to and how that goes, or if you maybe don't stay there, or all the things that begin to happen to us socially, in our families of origin, depending on our socioeconomics, all of that begins to sort of layer on top of that initial true connection as expressions of the one source. As in that connection, we have access to all that we need to navigate through this and any experience. And so, on a deep level, I feel like what we are being called forth to address, individually, collectively, and I feel like this is really began at the beginning of the pandemic. I feel like many of us, from just having to stop and slow down, became more aware of places in ourself where there was pain or discomfort, where we had sort of been running ourselves ragged People were saying, I'm recognizing that all I was doing and going and, it was just constant. I really wasn't present to half of it because it was just too much. And yet, I feel like as David, and this is where I'm heading, David so eloquently spoke about last week, left to our own devices, we do anything to avoid pain, and that includes staying really busy. That includes zoning out. That includes numbing out. It's not a comfortable experience for us, and I think socially we have not been supported in knowing how to do that gracefully, and to know that that is part of our natural experience, and in doing it and supporting ourselves and each other in those hard experiences of life, in those hard conversations, we gain so much more awareness about ourselves, about the depth of that connection with Spirit, and about the depth of our connection with each other. And so, in some ways, really since the end of March, I think many of us have been dealing with feelings of loss and grief. We've talked about this. We've talked about how oftentimes when we are triggered in a current experience of loss or grief, loneliness, isolation, it bumps up against old pain that may oftentimes have not been addressed, have not been truly felt, have not been allowed to really just feel it. And how can we, I would be the first to acknowledge that when I get into those places, and I have as a result, since March, I don't think that any of us could really escape some sense of pain, of fear, of confusion, of all of that. And then, it sort of rattles up some old pain. And in trying to be with myself with that, what I like to do, and I'm just going to tell you this so you don't do it, is right when I'm really feeling it, and I have this experience not too long ago where I just had to remove myself from all witnesses in the family and go in the bedroom, and I was really agitated and irritated. I know it's hard to imagine. And so I took myself out of everyone's harm's way, and I knew that it wasn't that, and I knew that we were, the stress was building. There hadn't been any school. There's all this stuff that we're managing with each other. And I started to do a writing exercise to just try to get at what was at the bottom of it. And I, started weeping, and it was kind of an old thing that was there that I was surprised to find. And then what I did, which I don't recommend you do, is immediately sort of heaped some shame and blame around why I was having this feeling, why that somehow something is almost wrong with me, that I'm not able to just navigate without feeling this discomfort of this it wasn't even unfinished. It was just this frustration of having, really what it was I can't do it. What if I can't do this? What if I can't do this? What? And what that drew me into, to the realization of the gravity of the stress that we were holding, and the pain of what I think we were all beginning to recognize as a pretty significant pause, if not a big change to life as we've known it. And recognizing all that I had taken for granted, recognizing all the ways that I hadn't been living true to what I know in those times of stress. And I was disappointed in myself, and I was afraid that some part of me wasn't going to be able to endure. Now, if I could have so then I circled around a bunch of shame and blame, which don't recommend. If I could have been a compassionate presence for myself. And I feel like oftentimes we can do this for each other better. To just let myself be and feel what I was feeling from a place of compassion, instead of trying to shut it down or trying to add a level of discomfort to it. It would have been so much easier, right? And I did, and we do, if we're willing to be with it and continue to sort of follow that down, there's usually a rich pearl that we can discover about ourselves, about the places that we have allowed ourselves to become disconnected from that truth and from living in a place of connection with each other. And so I love Tara Brach's work. David introduced her book, her newest book, Radical Compassion, last week, and I just started it, and I think it's really wonderful. Radical Compassion, learning to love yourself and your world with the practice of RAIN, which is an acronym which Ken and I were joking always reminds us of Mr. Rogers. But Mr. Rogers was a cool guy. I mean, he knew what he was talking about. So I don't know why I always just sort of disregard acronyms, because they're useful. Because when you want these tools, is not usually while you're just sitting here calmly reading the book thinking that's wonderful, but when you're in times of difficulty or conflict, right? What can I do here to get myself recentered to? So I'll go through it real quickly again, and he did it for you last week. We have a slide. RAIN, the R stands for recognize. Just stop and recognize what's going on inside of you. She uses the example in her using this as the circling of anxious thoughts and guilty feelings. You just recognize that. Sometimes that is a great step, right? Because it reconnects us with what's happening within us before we start projecting that to the people and the experiences around us. The second step, allow. So allow what is happening by breathing and letting it be. Even though we may not like what we are feeling, we can let our intention to allow it keep us from the urge to fix or change anything. And just as important, not to judge ourselves for having these feelings. See, she knew this. I should have read this before. I is investigate. So what feels most difficult about it? And with interest and with curiosity, direct your attention to your feelings that you're having. You can usually feel things in your body, a tension in your body, a heart rate change. Pay attention to that. And listen from a place of curiosity without judgment. Allowing ourselves to become conscious of the pulls of guilt or fear, whatever you may be experiencing, allows us to continue to investigate. Contacting that torn, anxious part of ourself, we ask, what do you need most right now? And again, we listen. And then the last step is N, to nurture. So we take whatever we received to offer ourselves some nurturing in that moment. And remind ourselves again, I think, see, if we just take that time to connect from a place of willingness and compassion, we also are able to reconnect with that place within us that is always sort of calling us, right, to the recognition and the realization of divine love expressing through us. And even sometimes if I can just connect with that, the way I will react to something changes pretty immediately. I still may not like it, right? I still, as I said earlier, I still may have to ask you 6 times to brush your teeth, which you're still going to do. But how I go about it doesn't trample all over our connection, right? So I want to share one more thing from Tara's work, because I feel like the more that we can do this, I think that we are all being called, as I've said, I think, to the edge of our own pain. We've talked in the past couple of weeks about the events and the collective feeling of pain and rage and angst and confusion as a result of the events after the death of George Floyd. And it's shining light for many of us on the institution and the systematic racism that is alive in this country, and that we have been sometimes unknowingly participating in. And that is a painful realization, I can tell you, as a white person, to let that in and to realize, I mean, I can feel the connection immediately that birds got my wings. How can I be with what that brings up in me and not shut down? Because then I'm not present to any sort of healing, any sort of reconciliation or work toward restorative possibilities. And so I love what she says, this idea of loving ourselves into healing. And I share this with you. I feel like I've shared this. It's not really a study, but it's a writing that was done by a hospice nurse who spent years caretaking people in their last periods of life and questioning what their biggest regret was. And inevitably they would say, the majority of them, some version of they wished they had lived a life truer to themselves, which is kind of surprising. And so she did some work in her own mind and in her own work to begin to ask those questions of herself, and then she teaches mindfulness, and so beginning to ask her students to contemplate that. So she started asking questions like, what does it mean to live true to yourself? Do you feel that your life is aligned with what matters to your heart? Are you living true to yourself today, right now? And as she began to ask these students of her these questions of her students, what she found was that this regret of the dying is also true for many of the rest of us. My students tell me that being true to themselves means being loving, present, and authentic. They speak of being honest, serving others, and serving the world. They talk about expressing their creativity, believing in their own worthiness, and working at what they love, and about having the strength to grow beyond their insecurities and to reconcile troubled relationships. They also say that almost daily they lose sight of these aspirations and intentions. Instead, they get caught up in reactivity, self-judgment, blaming others, pettiness, selfishness, living on autopilot. As one student said, each day there's a big gap between what's possible and how I'm actually living my life. And with that comes an ever-lurking sense of personal failure. I know that feeling of failure intimately. Yet this very suffering, feeling deficient and disconnected, has also been my most fertile ground for waking up. It has led me to a spiritual path and practices that I cherish. And when I get stuck in painful emotions, it brings me to a repeating realization, an insight that has profoundly changed my life. I have to love myself into healing. The only path that can carry me home is the path of self-compassion. And ultimately, radical compassion, which is what we're invited to grow into, and we begin with ourselves, means including the vulnerability of this life, all life in our heart. It means having the courage to love ourselves, each other, and our world. Radical compassion is rooted in mindful, embodied presence, and it is expressed actively through caring that includes all beings. And I know that on a deep level, we all feel the truth of this. We all know that the times when we fall short of living from that truth, living from a sense of connectedness with our source, with divine love, and with each other. And so I hope in my prayer and my practice at this time is to really continue to foster that relationship within myself. And I invite us all to take this time that feels like a real crossroads between crisis and possibility, to notice what is alive in us and what needs our compassion and our healing. And I just leave you with this invitation that Tara encourages us all to keep connecting to where the hurt is in ourselves and in our world. It's a blessing. It's a growing of freedom as we move from I to we, to have the softening and opening of our hearts, to feel that tenderness of caring for ourselves and our world. And we become more of who we truly are. Again, expressing that truth that resides within each and every one of us. And we make the space for everyone to express that truth. So I've said plenty. I invite us to take a time now of meditation and contemplation for some of this. So just invite you to get comfortable. Close your eyes if that is comfortable for you. And just take a deep breath. Just imagine yourself actually breathing in and through your heart space. You might even put your hand on your heart to remind you of that sacred connection to the source of your being and a connection to all of creation through that one source. And breathing into that awareness, just connect in your mind and your heart to your experience of your true nature, as I've talked so much about, that inherent, innate sense of wholeness that we all are born into this world with. Holding all of the qualities of divine love, of understanding, of clarity, all of the qualities that we can imagine God to possess are available to each of us through that connection, through that sacred space. So bring that to your mind's eye. Feel your connection with your truest nature. And then from that place of awareness, I just ask you to become aware of what leads you there most easily, most often. How do you find your way when so much is going on outside of you? And allow yourself to remember the path that is most worn, that leads you home. And make a note of that somewhere in your mind's eye, to follow that path frequently and often. And now I just invite you to consider what blocks your awareness of that true nature most frequently. When are you least aware of it? Could be in times of fear or judgment. You ask yourself, and just becoming aware of anything that stands to block your access to the truth of your being. Recognizing that that is something that you have allowed and you can remove. There is no separation in truth. And so that may be something to explore further, right? If you know what blocks you, take some time. from love and from compassion to explore that and to see how to let that go so that you can make your way more fully, more completely to that presence and that power of divine love seeking to express more fully as you and through you, to support you in healing, to support you in loving, and to support you and all of humanity to live fully, to live a life that represents our truest self. So be reminded, of course, that you can return here anytime, any place. To that connection that reminds us all that in truth there really is only love. The love that sets us free.
In this moment, in this place, I remember who I am, letting fear and worry fall away from me. I open my eyes to see there is only love. There is only love. Love that heals, love that sets us free. There is only love. There is only love. There is only love. Love that heals, love that sets us free. There is only love.
Thank you so much, Lauren. So nice to have you back. So now is the time in our service where we would normally collect our love offering, and we sincerely thank you from the bottom of our hearts for all of you who have continued to send in your checks and who have made use of our online options that are found on our website. You should have some options that will appear actually right now on your screen for you. And we encourage you all to consider checking that out with PushPay. You can set up reoccurring donations. You don't have to go in every time, but we certainly appreciate all of your support and your financial contributions. And all of you who continue to send checks, we certainly welcome that as well, and that information is on your slide. So together we will affirm and bless our offerings with our affirmation. Divine love as me blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. I am thankful.
I'd gladly walk across the desert with no shoes upon my feet, to share with you the last bite of bread I had to eat. And I would swim out to save you in your sea of broken dreams, when all your hope is sinking Let me show you what love means. Love can build a bridge between your heart and mine. Love can build a bridge. Don't you think it's time? Don't you think it's time? I would whisper love so loudly every heart would understand that love and only love can join the tribes of man. I will give my heart's desire so that you might see. The first step is to realize it all begins with you and me. Love can build a bridge between your heart and mine. Love can build a bridge. Don't you think it's time? Don't you think it's time? When we stand together, it's our finest tower. We can do anything, anything. Just keep believing in the power between your heart and mine. Love can build a bridge. Don't you think it's time? Don't you think it's time? Sing with me if you'd like. Please join me here. Love can build. Oh, love and only love between your heart and mine. Oh, love, no love. Don't you think it's time? Don't you think it's time? I believe it's time. I believe it's time.
Thank you again for that. I love that song by the Judds originally. Yes, yes, it's gorgeous. So just a few quick invitations for you. I want to remind you all, if you haven't seen on our website, we are participating and sharing the opportunity to engage in the 21-day challenge to equity building habit changer that has been shared by author Debbie Irving, who is the author of Waking Up White, which is the book that we are reading and discussing on the Authentic Conversations calls every Saturday at 10 a.m. So check that out. We give you a day-by-day challenge for you to consider how to participate in this conversation around becoming educated in the realms of racism and how we can respond to that from an educated place. So we hope you'll take advantage of that. And I feel like there was something else I was supposed to tell you. Natalie will be with you for your in the children's garden at 11. So stay tuned for that. And 11:30, we do have our Zoom fellowship opportunity today. So you can click on the link that was in your newsletter. And just an opportunity to see each other and check in and see how we're doing at 11:30. So we hope to see you there. And I think that concludes our service. We will close with the prayer for protection. The light of God surrounds us. I am the light of God. The love of God enfolds us. I am the love of God. The power of God protects us. I am the power of God. The presence of God watches over us. I am the presence of God. Wherever we are, God is. And so it is. So thank you so much for joining with us today. We hope to see you soon. You will be getting information in your email inbox about our considerations for how to reopen. Likely it will be in August. So we're working diligently on that, and we will let you know. So now let's let love move our world with Lauren.